take you on a little journey. It is beautifully sited. It's at the edge of an escarpment above a small burn, burn being a Scots word for a stream, a little stream. And below it was a beautiful big mill pond. And luckily we've actually got a photograph of the sluice gates and the mill pond from maybe the early 1800s. It's all grass now, that's all gone, but very interesting archaeological site in that sluice gate. So it'd be very picturesque. You imagine this tall 5-storey tower and overlooking the escarpment, the mill pond, and facing south to a very wide sky, the wide Carrick sky. In the distance in one area, you'll see a monument, an obelisk monument, granite monument to one of the Fergusons of Kilkirn, actually, who was involved in the British Army and its adventures in the British Empire. Sadly, they, in their work of building that, damaged a Neolithic fort. There's a spectacular vitrified fort called Kildoon. Kildoon, I think, in terms of is considered from the Gaelic as being the Brown Church. There's no evidence of a church having been there, but nevertheless, that's what it's called. Kildoon, prehistoric fort, damaged for the sake of a monument to a soldier fighting in India or whatever. This wide horizon. In the middle of June, the sun will rise at 3 o'clock in the morning, and thereabouts, over there in the east, and you get this wonderful sweep towards the west. Why that's important is that we think of castles as being Dungeons and Dragons, moats, boiling oil, sieges. No, it was a country house. It had beautiful parks in front of it, parks being the Scots word on this occasion for fields. And the main field to the north of the castle would have been for sheep. Cows, no, cows are awfully smelly. Sheep keep the grass down, they're not so troublesome. So this is beautifully sited with this wonderful southern aspect. The house is set exactly north, south, east, west, so to speak, axis. Why that view is important and why I can argue that it wasn't a castle, it was a home, is that there were 2 rooms in that castle that were very special. But let's go to the entrance first. Surrounding Baltersan were a series of courtyards, little courtyards. This was their defence mechanism, actually, because although I'm saying that there's no besieging going on, there's no wars and attacks, you still had to be wary, and most often wary of your cousins, because if you had an argument over land rights, these guys would turn up with a gang, and they'll bring ladders to climb over the walls of your yards. So the more you could break them down, this gang of men breaking through your gates, the better, and slow them down, and they're coming through one at a time, easier to defend. And this was very common. This is a common style with tower houses and keeps and so on. So we're now through the gates, and we've gone through a couple of other gates, and all the time as you look up at the building, you will see spy holes. People call them gun loops, and some people think you fired arrows through them, but the field of fire would be so limited that they were more really as spy holes to try and identify who's coming to your door. A similar thing in terms of big numbers of people would be actually in peaceful times. If you invited one of your neighbours, another earl or whatever, another baron or laird, he would turn up with his family, and usually that would mean about 10 children, with his servants, who are also known as bodyguards. So he brings the heavies with him. You've got this enormous group of people, you've got to feed them. So you want to make sure that there's nobody in amongst them that you've had a fight with, because once they get in your house, you're in trouble. So we go to the doorway now, and we're at the entrance. There's only one entrance at ground level. That's easily defended by, at your right-hand side, there's a gun loop. This was for firing guns out of, a nice oval-shaped thing. That was at belly level. So if you were an enemy trying to break down the door, you could be shot right at that corner. You're hemmed in by a small L shape of walls, a little tiny courtyard that made sure you couldn't come in with a battering ram. There was no, like, imagine having a billiard table in your bathroom. There would not be enough room to move your arm back with a billiard cue, and this was the defence against battering rams, a very narrow, close-in courtyard. But we'll say we're peaceful people, let's be peaceful. So we're visiting a good friend and we're going to get our dinner. This is in the middle of the afternoon, by the way. You didn't have your main meal in the evening, because if you're visiting somebody and the main meal is turning when things are going dark, very dangerous to go back home in the dark. No proper roads, but your enemies could be lying in wait. And we've got lots of historical records that say they were lying in wait. And so you would have your main meal and entertainment in the middle of the afternoon. This comes up actually in the story in the interior. Above the entrance was an inscription. This house was begun the 1st of March 1584 by John Kennedy of Pennyglen and Margaret Cathcart, his spouse. 1st of March was a traditional start date. They maybe started in the 2nd, the 3rd, the 10th, I don't know, or maybe before. It's just that was a significant start date because the frosts are over by then and it's safe to start building. Lovely inscription, now totally wiped out by weather, soft sandstone and is obliterated, but luckily it was recorded in the 1890s when Charles Rennie Mackintosh actually sketched the place. Mackintosh was very much influenced by Tower House architecture. So above that inscription was a coat of arms. So many of these castles and tower houses, they have a nice rectangle or square with a coat of arms, and in this case you can just see the trace of the shield that was in Kennedy's. And again, luckily, we would know the inscription. And the inscription was, I'll say it in English, it's from the Bible. The name of the Lord is a strong tower, and the righteous run to it and are saved. That also appears on Killoughon Castle. Remember, Kennedy's first wife was a Cathcart of Killoughon. The inscription above the door at Killoughon still survives, so we know the exact letter styles and the wording in terms of Killoughon's rebuilding. Killoughon was built 2 years after Baltersan, but it's a doppelganger. I know, not an identical doppelganger, but it is a doppelganger for Baltersan. In this case, they don't have a round wheel stair, they've got what's called a scale and plat type, like modern staircases. Anyway, we know, thankfully, people recorded these things before they were obliterated. And then very high up on a skew pot, the skew pot is the very last stone that rests on the head of the wall head, before you get the gable. So you've got the stepped gable in Scottish architecture called crow steps, or in Scots, corby step gable. The very last one bore the initials JKMC, or John Kennedy, Margaret Cathcart. So he's stamping his identity on the whole building before you even get in. As we enter, we're confronted by a wonderful wheel stair on the left, very broad for its time, very broad. A lot of these castle stairs were very narrow. This one is wide. This speaks of money. Even underneath this stair, where there was a little hidey hole underneath that staircase, which had a spy hole in it to watch the main gate. So you're keeping an eye out coming through the main gate. Even that was plastered. Now, plastering in such an innocuous little corner speaks of wealth. Plaster was expensive, as was glass. So we'll turn to our right and we'll go into an area where there are 3 vaults, barrel vaulted as we call them. 2 of them are springing east to west, and one, the kitchen, is springing north to south. This spreads the massive load of stone above, and that barrel vault spreads onto the foundations and the thick wall. The walls are about a metre thick at ground level, and the barrel vault will spread that. But there's also a wide corridor. It's about, I'd say it's 4 feet wide in imperial measurement, so just over a metre and a bit. That's a service corridor from the kitchen to and from the kitchen, wide enough for 2 servants to pass each other. So the first cellar is actually the wine cellar, and that has a private stair, a little stair up to the Great Hall in the first floor level. In Scots, we would have called historically the ground level was the first level, like I think in America. And nowadays we talk about ground floor, first floor, second, and so on. So you've got the wine cellar with its private stair, and that's where the downstairs servants would have brought the food along into the wine cellar. The wine, of course, would be under lock and key, and that little stair would go up to a service passage, which we'll come to. The kitchen was quite small, but very big arched fireplace, and we know the arrangements there as well from other tower houses of a similar period, and especially one called the House of Park, sometimes Castle of Park, down at Glenluce, which is another doppelganger. I don't know if you get more than one doppelganger, but it's a triple ganger. And it's German for 3 and 5 dry ganger. And that one has always retained its roof. It's now a holiday home run by the Landmark Trust. And so we got a lot of the features that would have existed at Baltersan are still in existence in the House of Park. So we leave the kitchen, which had a service hatch at the end of the corridor, and that was to keep the servants out of the kitchen, because the kitchen was dominated by one of the 2 most important people on the estate. And I'm not talking about the laird and his lady, I'm talking about the cook and the gardener. The gardener produced the food, the cook cooked it, and if you took those 2 people away, you starve. That's why cooks ruled the roost. And if the laird come into the kitchen, the cook would say, "Get out." Back then, actually, most cooks were men. And this is evident. You find this in Stirling Castle, the reconstructed kitchens in the Stirling Castle. It's all men and boys working there. Anyway, this wonderful big arch kitchen had clean water coming in one end and the dirty slop drain at the other, as you'll find at the House of Park. We're now going back upstairs then. We'll ascend. You don't climb the stairs in this wonderful big turnpike stair. You ascend. And we go up that stair and through a doorway into the Great Hall at first floor level. That door was well barred, as was, I should have mentioned, the entrance door. The entrance door would have been heavy oak door with big iron studs in it. So if somebody turns up with an axe, they'll be creating sparks and they'll have a blunt axe in no time. So they think, let's burn the door down. Burn the door down, and what are they confronted with? A yett. The yett is an interlaced iron gate, and that's your second line of protection. And that would have been difficult to knock down. Something like 2.5 centimetres thick iron, an inch in imperial. So we're upstairs now. We'd actually be screened off. There's an area on one side, at the east side of the Great Hall, which in Scots is called Hallands, in English, the Screens Passage. So the servants coming up that stair from the wine cellar with the food are now screened off from the view of your very posh guests. So your guests are coming in for their dinner. You get this wonderful hall, which is almost a double cube. And this is another clue that would allude to Knights Templar, which is another big story for Ayrshire, perhaps mythology. Takes us back to Robert the Bruce and so on. But anyway, the double cube. Essentially, you're talking about 36 feet by 18 or something like that. So we now enter and the tables are set out. The laird is sitting at one end, the west end, on a dais. This is very unusual for tower houses of the period and of the status. This man is not an earl or a duke or whatever. Kennedy is simply what's called a bonnet laird. A bit like the bonnet and the wood carving. A bonnet laird was somebody who had ideas above his station in many ways. And he didn't have a title, but he could be called a laird, and then the next level up was a baron, etc. He would be sitting there just like King James in the great hall of Stirling Castle, where there is a dais end for the king and his retinue at the top table. Kennedy's back would be to the flue of the kitchen chimney. Stone is a great retainer of heat, so it'd be one of the hottest places, or warmest places rather, in the great hall. There was also a great fireplace, but who wants to sit too close to a blazing fire? So he's safely away from the big burning fire, and he's got the warmth, the radiating warmth coming from the kitchen. Within the height of this hall, there is a secret chamber. How do we know this? Well, we can see from the traces of stonework at the east end of the hall, where there is the remains, we call them tusk stones. It's stones that stick out from the wall, and it would be something like alternate stones sticking out, so that the next stones would be bonded in to it. So we know that there was an L-shaped wall at the east end of the Great Hall. Now within that space, above the staircase from the wine cellar, there are two windows, two little narrow windows. So you have to hold on, why two windows in the same height of the hall? The other windows in the hall are massive. They're probably, well, I can't remember the distance. In Imperial, they're about 7 feet high. They are massive. They are wonderful archways above them, reminiscent of Stirling Castle. So here again, I'm referring to Stirling Castle that pops up in the story of Baltersan in several occasions. But these are so resembling the great royal chambers in Stirling Castle that there's got to be a connection. And the connection, I think, was Sir William MacDowell. Bear in mind, John Kennedy of Baltersan's second wife was a MacDowell, and Sir William MacDowell at the time was the King's Master of Works, a bit like Chief Architect. I think John Kennedy of Baltersan had access to people in high places, and he was able to access top quality masons, or at least a master mason, to build Baltersan, because the architectural features speak of a master mason, not a builder, not a stone layer or a brick layer or whatever. This is a master mason that's designed this place. The wealth comes in again because of the gigantic windows. The lower part, maybe the lower third, were simply wooden shutters. All these windows had strong bars on them. Now, it might look like a prison to have bars in your windows, but it meant you could sleep at night feeling safe, nobody's coming in. But it's the extent of the glazing area. Glass was very expensive. So this speaks again of wealth. But it's this little secret chamber. How did they get into it? If you were within the hall, all you would see is an L shape, two walls. No windows, no notice at all what's in behind there. So you just assume it's a staircase. But on the wall, the southern wall of that space, one can see clearly 3 holes in the wall for joists for the wooden floor. So you know there was a floor because you've got 2 windows, so you know there's a floor in between. But further up is fascinating. Well, when we go up the stairs again, we'll go up the private stair this time, I'll tell you about that corner. So we've got this great hall, and down at the other end, there's the Baron and His Majesty. It is extremely rare, if not unique, for a tower house of its period and status, which is not massive, it's not Earl and Duke level, to have this 2-level floor. This man had ideas, some would say above his station, so to speak. It's spectacular. So on either side of that dais end, the raised end, are again 2 gigantic windows with the wonderful voussoirs, big long stones that create this wonderful archways. That's bringing light in on the Baron or the Laird sitting in His Majesty there. And this feature you can find in the Great Hall of Stirling Castle, where the king would have sat. But right beside it is a recess in the wall. In Scots we'd call it a press or a cupboard. Actually, I think it was an open area with shelving, and that would have been for the display of his best pewter. I'm calling it pewter because at that period the wealthy folk ate their meals off pewter, whereas the humble folk had wooden platters, and in medieval times all they had was a slice of bread to put their stew on top of. But this is the funny thing, if you're a high status person you had pewter, but you also got lead poisoning. You were better being humble with a wooden platter. Anyway, this would be for the display of plate well away from the entrance, so no light-fingered guest could help himself to a nice pewter plate and carry it across the hall. It's also right beside the private stair from the laird to the laird's apartments. This private stair, much narrower, again a turnpike stair, and after about 13 steps there is a spy hole. A round spy hole, similar to one on the east side of the building, in fact two on the east side, one very high up, one low down. Why did he need a spy hole for that hall? Is he expecting armed men to come in? It's a possibility, because you get into a lot of trouble. This Kennedy of Baltersan, he was a troublemaker, serious troublemaker. Anyway, we've got that now. Because of cold walls and drafts and so on, often doorways would have a drape, a big curtain or something that you could push across and keep out the drafts. I suspect that there was a drape hiding this spy hole. Kennedy's sitting at the table doing a land deal, doing a negotiation, and he's trying to beat the other person down in price, the other person trying to raise the price, and Kennedy will say, look, I'll just go upstairs and I'll get that charter and then we can talk about it. He will go up his 13 steps and listening while the guys down below say, we'll beat him down, we've got him now, we'll beat him down, or they'll give away some secret, and he's listening in. So Walter Scott recorded this as the Laird's Lug, the Laird listening in, and it can be found in many tower houses and castles in Scotland. Amosfield down in southern Scotland, Galloway area, and maybe Dumfriesshire. I think Amosfield might be in Dumfriesshire, and away as far north, right into Aberdeenshire and so on. I think there were two things going on. One, that's the Laird's Lug, but the secret chamber could also have been used as a Laird's Lug. There might have been, as Amosfield, there's just a little slot high in the wall that wouldn't be noticed. And I think whoever was in the secret chamber was listening in as well. Opportunities. So we got to the Laird's Solar, as we could call it, the sunny room. And it's one of two rooms at the next level up, at the third level of the tower house. These rooms had special windows, which is a unique survival in Scottish architecture of the period. These windows face south. All these windows, almost all of the windows in Baltersan had stone benches. Bear in mind the walls are thick, the walls are over a metre thick. So you would put stone benches there, put nice warm cushions on them as well, of course. So you could sit at that window and get the sun in your face and the fresh air into the place, looking at this wonderful big view facing south. This speaks of leisure. This doesn't speak of people fighting in clan battles or whatever. This is people at leisure. What's unique about this window and its companion in the next room? The wooden shutters. These windows had the iron grills, the interlaced iron grills, wooden shutters in the bottom part. Now, logically, you have to open the shutters inwards. And these two windows, the shutters slid into the thickness of the wall. A unique surviving feature. Shutters at windows are very commonplace in many houses, and for hundreds of years, of course, shutters at windows, because glass was expensive. But in Scottish architecture, you can find it at Edinburgh. If you're standing in the esplanade of Edinburgh Castle, is the castle behind you, you could see a building called Cannonball House. There's a cannonball embedded in the wall. It wasn't far from the castle. It was a cheeky mason who planted it there. But you will see grooves for wooden shutters to protect the windows. And that was outside the building. In Baltersan, probably also at Colochen 2 years later, the shutters sliding into the thickness of the wall. So interesting is this feature that I was approached years ago by two Dresden architects in Germany, and they were doing a book on window shutters in Europe. There was only one place represented from the United Kingdom, and it was Baltersan. They were fascinated by these wooden shutters sliding into the thickness of the wall. So that's one of the rooms. Another way of knowing that there's wealth in these places are the number of, it's called ombre. It's from a French word, wall cupboards, wall recesses that would have doors and locks. This is speaking, they've got wealth they need to protect. So we'll now skip through to the next room at the same level. And this is the one above the secret chamber. Now, what do we find in that southeast corner of Baltersan? There's the big fireplace, and there is an ingle nook seat. Ingle being a corner. A nook is the corner rather, the ingle is the fireplace. Apologies. It is like a throne. It is a beautiful design, and it's almost like an armchair, this seat, right beside the fire. But what's underneath the laird's feet? I think a priest's hole. I think Kennedy was a Roman Catholic, and we're talking here about 25 years after the Reformation. And I think that's where the priest would hide if word spread that, the Protestants are coming, you better hide. That man, that priest would go down a ladder into that secret chamber. The trapdoor would be where Kennedy's feet would be. And you're not going to go over to Kennedy and say, move your feet. You'll just stand and talk to him. So I think that's what was happening with this secret chamber. It was a priest's hole. And there are some very rare in Scotland, very, very rare. There is one up in the north of Scotland again, a very famous Roman Catholic family at the time. Very common in England, priest's hole, very common. So that's the secret chamber of Baltersan. And then above that level is the picturesque. So here we're going into, it's a hierarchical building, isn't it? They all were. Buckingham Palace is a hierarchical building. So the higher you go, the lower you go down the social scale. So in the next level, what you've got is beauty. In the southeast and in the northwest corners are beautiful round turrets. And they're not just round pepper pot turrets. The walls of these turrets taper very gently as they rise. Elegance. The corbels, the brackets that support these turrets, are carved in swan neck shapes, not just a simple radius stone. It is carved like the neck of a swan. This is high quality architecture, high quality mason work. And then in the garret, as it's called, garret's from a French word, garreteur, for watchman, or the loft or the attic, we would normally call it. Not much headroom, but it could have been used as storage, but more often maybe servants. Now we'll go back outside the building, realising this is a very high quality building all the way through here, and we'll stand back and look at it. We'll look at the southeast corner and find that the wall tapers at the top, perfectly plumb at the lower part, but underneath this turret, it goes in. It's an architectural feature called entasis, which is from Greek. In Greek columns, they tapered them, otherwise they would look top heavy. So it's this very subtle tapering that would allow the column to look uniform and not top heavy. What it would do at Baltersan by having this ingo here at the top, it's very subtle, is that it would allow the turret to protrude without upsetting the gravity of the turret. And that makes it more pronounced, more elegant, and you find that at both corners, the southeast and the northwest. We then go round to the southwest corner and we'll look at the wall where there are no turrets, perfectly plumb. From 1584 to this day, that wall is perfectly plumb. We'll then go round to the northwest corner, just along a wee bit here, And if we get ourselves our eyes in the right angle and we line up the northwest corner with the corner of the staircase turret, because bear in mind Baltersan is an L-shaped building, you will realise that not only does this corner have the entasis with the turret, as we've talked about, but the staircase turret is so gently sloped as it rises. It is wonderful. It doesn't take long to realise that this is where Timothy Pont's description of Baltersan said, a stately, fine house. You've got both that southwest corner of the turret and the northwest corner of that staircase tower both slope inwards. And it makes the cap house, the room at the very top of the staircase, again, stick out further without upsetting the gravity of the building. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. These are subtle things, not easy to achieve because you've got to maintain a consistent angle over an enormous height. This is what makes Baltersan so beautiful and so important and so desperate to be saved. Imagine if all of that just fell down one day and is lost. Well, we don't need to imagine it. It happened in 1968 when a hurricane swept through the west of Scotland, caused enormous damage in Glasgow, with the old Victorian tenements losing their roofs. The east gable of Baltersan collapsed, and with it a lot of architectural detail. Fortunately, in the 1940s, it had been photographed. So these are the features, and these are just the features that we can see today. What else was lost? The roof was gone. There might have been dormer windows. Well, we know there were dormer windows at one height. There might have been what they call storm windows, and that's up to the attic. There might have been nice carved parts to those windows that are all gone. So we've lost a lot, as well as losing everything in the interiors. It's all gone. And yet it can be saved. But that is the story for the future. The history of the building has been recorded. There's only a little last bit to be done, and there's access to the Ferguson of Kilkerran papers would give us the answers. And we've got the whole story on how Baltersan could be saved. It has many rare and unique features. And come the story of Crosshraigh Abbey, its near neighbour, and probably the source of the wealth for Baltersan, we'll come on to the story of the Knights Templar. And that does bring in Robert the Bruce as well. I hope you've enjoyed this story. I hope you've travelled with me throughout every room and every staircase of the castle while you're sitting comfortably enjoying your coffee. And I'll look forward to the next time we meet. Thank you.